All right. I think we are recording, Ray. And
Yes, sir.
I believe we have a special guest with us down there. When I say down there, I got three screens going, and I'm going to let you, Ray, introduce our guest. But before I do that, I want to just remind everybody, I want to thank everybody that gave a lot of questions last week about chapter 4. It was a great chapter. Um, a lot of those that are coming from my side who had a lot of questions, especially going into chapter 5 with the Sermon on the Mount and understanding Jesus from the perspective that a lot of Christians don't understand. I got some great questions and had a lot of great opportunities for conversations. We want y'all to continue to do that. And I think after today, with our discussion today, as we begin the Sermon on the Mount, and this will not be a one-time study time. We're going to spend several sessions through chapter 5, 6, and 7. And so with that, I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to turn it over to Ray and let him introduce our guest, who is from right around the corner, right? So, Ray, I'm going to let you do it, bro.
Hey, how you guys doing? Hope all is well. And today we have a special guest with us, our good friend, scholar, Chus Casal, coming with us all the way from Spain. What city are you in again, Chus?
Santander.
Okay. Yeah, and Chus has written extensively on many topics concerning on Torah and especially first century Judaism. Right there, Mitch is holding up one of his first works called "Analyzing the Gospels," which is an introduction and an introduction, and it deals with the historical background of Jesus and the apostles in the first century setting. He's also just recently wrote another book on Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. I would really recommend everyone to check out those works, especially analyzing the Gospels, if you guys are tuning in with us. And today, Chus will be helping us with this chapter, chapter 5 of Matthew, which is, has a lot of the actual teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. And without further ado, maybe Chus can say a few words on, just on him and his background and how did he come to, all the things that we know of him and his works today.
Okay, so first of all, I've been learning about Judaism, Christianity, and many other religions actually. And I've been like 15 years studying about Yeshua. So I came to understand in my way that he was a Hasidic Jew. So he was an Orthodox Jew, and that's the way I understand it. But I also study Kabbalah and mysticism. So those are things that are always in my interpretations. So I hope you don't mind.
Yes.
Oh yes. No, that's amazing, and it will clear up and help us to understand a lot of the background and teachings of Jesus, because there's this big misunderstanding that today many are waking up to, and understanding that Jesus was not a Christian, especially a Christian in the traditional sense, but he was a religious Jew. And when we say a religious Jew, we're talking about religiously, meaning he was not a Christian by faith or practice. He was a Jew within first century Judaism. And to really grasp his teachings, which have been, for the most part, in the vehicle of Christianity and interpreted and seen through this lens, we need to bring him back to his historical land, language, context, and religious framework. And I think that, you're one of the people in our day that probably has had one of the greatest effect on me and on many others to really grasp that understanding. And so without further ado, Mitch, I think we should go right into the text of
Yes.
Matthew 5
Okay.
today. And Chus has written, he's actually currently writing a commentary on Matthew. And I believe he's like on chapter 10. A lot of this stuff you can get and you could read for yourself on the web page 13 Petals,
Yes.
where
Yeah.
he's one of the big contributors there, and you could see it there. But he's actually finished with chapter 5, and so he could help us a lot on this chapter. So let's get right into it, Mitch.
Yes, and I want to say too that it's so cool that we have multiple levels of engagement from Christianity through me being 20 years in the Christian world, and then coming away from that theology and that teaching when I went through seminary and learning about this, and then Ray, you having had the sort of the same walk, and Zeus, you coming from an international look and flavor and discussion, because Ray told me that you are Jewish, and I believe, having grown up in Spain, and so
Yeah.
and your interaction and your study and your context brings a lot of flavor to what we're talking about and what we try to get across, because a lot of the people that I have discussions with, Zeus, are people like your age and Ray's age. Okay, I'm a little bit older, man. Okay, but it's more people that have access to the internet and have access to good minds that open up and let people really search and understand what it is they believe. So I just want to again thank both you guys for
Okay.
for taking this opportunity.
Yeah, Chus's perspective is pretty unique because, again, like you and I were saying, we were, our religious background is Christianity. This is how
Right.
we were raised. This is kind of how we were brought up. But
Right.
Chus is pretty unique in that he began searching pretty young in his life,
Yes.
and he delved into a couple of different religions,
Yeah.
studied them all, and has studied Judaism extensively. Even from what I remember, even having been able to study with a rabbi, and also studied at taking actual courses.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where did you take courses at again, Chus?
Here in Spain, in the north.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
There was a group here. They were actually Breslov, which
Really?
is
Oh,
weird
amazing.
because they usually don't come here to Spain. But
Yes.
yeah, it
That's-
was magic.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah,
I
that's
met them
beautiful.
here. Yeah.
That's
That's
beautiful.
awesome. That's awesome.
That's beautiful. Yes.
Yeah. So he has a
That
perspective from
yes.
he has a perspective from the outside coming in.
Yes.
Instead of somebody being born and raised in Christianity, it
Yes.
gives it a different view. So, all right.
Well, let's
All
get
right. What
looking. I'll just get us kind of, as we go into chapter 5, a lot of times from a Christian theological perspective, we are now looking at Jesus, and a lot of Christians don't realize who Jesus, Yeshua, is talking to when he begins this process. When he goes up to the mountain, he's actually getting away from the crowd. He's actually moving away from the crowd with the disciples, where a lot of Christians think that he is speaking to the crowd or that he's drawing a crowd. This is where in Christian culture they use the whole context of Jesus was worried about numbers, okay? And he's actually moving away from that because he's not speaking to Gentiles. He's speaking to Jews and who are in the conversation that he's having, okay? So as he takes the disciples up to the mountaintop, we see a picture a lot of Moses going up to Sinai and receiving the Torah. And so Jesus now is going up onto the mountaintop to begin his dissertation or his teachings with his disciples. and having that comparison to, I think, to Moses and his whole his whole experience, I think, is important for Christians to understand, and also to understand who is Jesus talking to. You know,
Exactly. Exactly.
we're not
Exactly.
we're not talking about the Apostle Paul. I mean, we're putting that away. We're talking about
Yeah.
who he's talking to, and this helps to clarify a little bit. As he gets up there, just exactly what it is that, as he begins the teaching, the actual dissertation of the Sermon on the Mount. So
The traditional understanding of this chapter 5 from a Christian standpoint has always been, okay, here it is, guys. Here's where the law says this, but here comes Jesus and he's gonna say this. So that Jesus' words trump that of the law, the Torah. And so we're gonna put everything back in its context. The truth will help us here to understand what is actually going on. And without further ado, let's get right into the text. We read here in verses, we'll read the first 3 verses and then we'll give a little bit of commentary here. So verse 1, I'll read it from an English Standard Version, and it says like this: when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." All right. That's the first 3 verses. And Chus, help us here, man. I was going through your commentary.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that this chapter begins with the idea that Yeshua went up to the mountain, because there's a tradition there in Galilee, right?
Yes.
Sorry, the names in English, sometimes I mispronounce them because I actually don't know them in English. So, okay. So he went to a mount in Galilee, and when, like you say, right, to move away from the crowd. So his disciples went there and he taught them there. It's interesting that there's a historian, I think he wrote a book about Palestine, and he said that the mount, according to tradition, is close to Sefat. Or how do you say that in English?
Safed. Yeah, Safed. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Safed, for those who don't know, is a place for Kabbalists, for people
Yes.
who are into the mystical stuff of the Torah. So there, Simon Bar Yochai, the Ari, all the most famous rabbis, they taught there in Safed. And there's a teaching, I think, in the Shar HaGilgulim, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So in that place, they enumerate a lot of righteous people who died in Safed. And one of the mentions there, they name a lot of names, right? A lot of righteous people. And one of the names, I think, let me see if I find it here. Yeah, it's chapter 37. It says that there, Yeshua is buried, right? The burial place of
Buried.
Yeshua.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the burial place of Yeshua. And at the end of the chapter, he says, "My their merits help us." So it's interesting that he's enumerated together with a lot of righteous people, because people tend to believe that Orthodox Jews hate Yeshua, right?
Right. Right.
And here is a teaching from Kabbalah that says he's a righteous person.
Yes.
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 Yeah, it's interesting.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting. I remember when I first read that by the Arizal, one of the greatest Kabbalists in Judaism. It was hard for me to grasp, and because a lot of us Westerners we deal with a lot of a lot of like literal interpretations, and that I guess that throws us for a loop and it confuses. But what it's actually teaching, and when you understand it, it mentions him the entire chapter, talks about the burial places of many righteous rabbis and Kabbalists of Israel. They
Yeah.
start just they start talking about different places in the Galilee and in Safat where they're buried at. And then there's this one place in the chapter where it says that Yeshu, right? And it says, so it's Yeshu the Christian. In English, this is the way that it is interpreted, but it's no doubt that it's talking about the Jesus of history, right? And he's also buried there. And at the end of the chapter, we find out that these burial places of all the righteous. It doesn't say anything else. It's just like that, and it ends like that.
And it's not actually literal. It's not like people are
right
literally there, but it's a symbol of mysticism, which is interesting. And the Hebrew in that book uses a specific sentence for Yeshua, right? It says Sham Kavor Yeshu, Sam Kavor Yeshu, which is the gematria or the numerical value of Metatron, which is very interesting. Yeah.
Wow.
I think you spoke about it in the previous video, right? So about this angel. Yeah. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
Yes. This is the same angel. I think that some scholars or some writers who write on the New Testament from a Jewish perspective, they interpret it as being the angel of Jesus. He's the angel of a lot of righteous individuals, but he's predominantly the angel, meaning the higher, the way it's interpreted in Judaism is the higher, the counterpart of Jesus in the heavenly, so his angel. So when you see in Revelations that he says he sent his angel, that Jesus sent his angel, this would be that angel, correct, Juice?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I want to say, guys, that you know, when I was going through seminary, the discussion of mysticism, or even the topic of mysticism, okay, and then, you know, as I began to study Kabbalah, and I began to, Rebbe Nachman is one of my favorites, and I began to put those pieces together from the literal meaning to the different levels of meanings and different understandings for a lot of Christians that are now beginning to walk this way, are beginning to, you know, start to try to understand this, the importance of the mysticism aspect and the importance of Kabbalah when it comes to understanding, because I'm still new at this, and a lot of the people that are going to be watching this are still kind of new at this. And I will have discussions come tomorrow about some of the things that are discussed here. But I just want to put an emphasis on how important, when we do read scripture, whether it's the Hebrew scripture or whether it's what's called the New Testament or the Gospels, that mysticism and the understanding of some of this of what we are told, especially in Revelation, because that's why that's a difficult book for Christians to grab hold of, because they want it to be literal, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure.
And they don't understand those levels. And so when we start talking about certain pieces of the connection with Yeshua, there's teaching that has to go on behind the scenes, you know, that otherwise they get lost. And when you start talking about mysticism or, you know, the understanding of Kabbalah, it requires, I will have more discussions tomorrow about it, and the next day.
For sure.
You know, so we want to remember that how important that is to let people understand that. You know?
The New Testament never stops and says, "Hey, disclaimer, guys. You know, for all you Christians, you know, this is like this and this is like this." It doesn't do that. Yes. It takes for granted that the audience, yes, the people who they're talking to, the you know, all the interactions that are happening in the Gospels and in the New Testament are, yeah, people who are acquainted with Judaism, who are people who are acquainted with Jewish life, with Jewish norms, with the oral Torah, with the written Torah, all these things. It takes for granted that this is what's going on. Yes. And so it doesn't take any time to explain those type of details. Yes. You know, the people who are reading this supposedly should have some type of education on the fundamentals of Torah and Judaism, etc., or else there would be problems. Christians stumble and they have a lot of problems trying to accept or grasp these concepts because there's only one way of interpreting the scriptures. It's almost it's read in a locked way. It's locked. There's nothing else outside of that. But in Judaism, in the Torah, according to the Hebrew scripture and according to Jewish people, and Chus can help us with this, there are 70 different ways, meaning there's a multiple different type of ways of reading the scripture in truth, meaning that this interpretation is true and this interpretation is true, and there's no controversy there. That there can be multiple levels of truth, right, Chus? Is this how it is?
Yeah, exactly. The 70 faces of the Torah, they say the sages. There are 70 faces of the Torah. So one verse can be interpreted in 70 different ways, and all of them are correct. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Exactly. And
yes.
Yeah. And so a lot of times, go ahead, Mitch.
And that's where we get to the Ashari statements where that Jesus makes, where one thing is said, but then he says, I have come to say that, something else. And people think that he is overriding this. But what I try to explain to them is, in Judaism, there is the building of the fences around the Torah, around the commands, okay? And he's not just saying, he's taking the command, or he's taking that statement and he's expanding it. He's making it harder than what it actually is. And where in Christianity, we think Jesus came to make it a whole lot simpler, okay? And with those statements being said a lot of times, you have to understand that Jesus was so tight with Torah and so tight with building those fences around the Torah, around the laws, around the commandments of the, he was so into it to the point to where he wanted to actually making it more difficult for people, and Christians don't grasp that. They think it's just he came and said what he said and it overrides the Ashari statements,
Meaning it's not that it's not necessarily that he came to make it more difficult as much as that he tried to get people from never coming close to actually breaking the actual written commandments. And so this is something that was the norm for Jewish rabbis to do. They elaborated and expounded on the law of God, right? And so they added fences in order so that people wouldn't transgress the actual commandment, or they got to the root problem of what it meant. So he, right here in chapter 5, you hear him say stuff like, you have heard it said. Where have you heard it said? Of course, in the law, in the Torah, which was their norm. You've heard it said in the Torah that you should not commit murder, right? But then he'll say something, but I tell you, this is him elaborating as a rabbi. Other rabbis did the exact same thing. And he'll say something like, but I'll tell you that if you hate your brother in your heart, because, he'll start telling you where does the actual murder occur. According to the rabbis, it's like this. The actual murder occurs in your heart. The beginning, the moment you start hating a person, because you don't just kill somebody out of nowhere. You start killing them in your heart first before you ever do the actual physical action.
Yes.
And so
I don't think there's actually a fence or a law in this case. I think he's just expounding musar, which is ethic.
Yeah.
He's trying to point out the ethical value of a command. So you shall not murder, for example, right? So there is something deeper within this command. It's not just don't kill people. It's don't hate them either. It's something deeper.
Yes. That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yes, Musar, for our audience, Musar is ethics and morals. It's the way that in Judaism we talk about ethics and morals, which are interconnected in everything that has to do with the law, the Torah, etc.
Yes.
That's a great point, Chus.
Yes. And there are many schools in the first century. For example, in the Dead Sea manuscripts, right? they use this technique. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. Is antithesis, um,
Yes.
which is this school says this thing, but we say this thing. They are not fighting against the other school. They are just offering different points of view, their own point of view
Ah.
in this case. So it's not actually fighting against the sages like people think sometimes.
Yes.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, it's important to note, folks, that in Jesus' day, there were actually different types of schools of thought and streams of Judaism. Meaning, we had the group of the Pharisees, which Jesus was very much aligned to, and there's various scholars who say that in very much practice, maybe not by office, but in practice, Jesus was a Pharisee, and he was very much aligned with the Pharisees more than anyone else. That any of the other groups that we find in the New Testament, like the Sadducees who didn't believe in the world to come and life in the world to come. They didn't believe in angels. Uh, they didn't believe in the oral tradition, which Jesus did. The Pharisees did. You have the Essene sect, which Chus just mentioned. Um, there's the group of the zealots who were like, some of them can be connected to the Pharisees, zealots that were Pharisees because they were like zealous for God, and very much strong
Yeah.
people. Some say that Jesus could even been connected to some of those, and but there was some rogue groups within the zealots that are called the Zacharis that were like terrorists, fighting
Yeah.
against the Roman Empire, and etc. So yeah, it's important to understand that those different groups were very much alive, and the only group that existed and has come down to our day, all the other ones had pretty much disappeared, um, are the group of the Pharisees, which uh, went down to establish what we know as today as Orthodox Judaism, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So I wanted to also ask you, Chus, on this verse where it says that, um, he says that he ascended the mountain and sat there. Sat there. What is that code for when a rabbi sits down? What does that mean?
It's very very common to use it in the Talmud when the rabbi sits down, it's already to teach. They are synonyms. Um, and they usually stand up when they read from the Torah, when they read from the text. But when they teach their own teachings, they sit down and the people gather around them. So when it says he sat down, it's a synonym with teaching.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, that's so much different, huh, Mitch, than we understand it in the
I mean,
Christian world.
yeah, the opposite to that would be the guy that goes up to the pulpit or up to the stand to teach. Okay, anytime
Exactly.
somebody walks up to the platform, he's ready to teach. Whereas, like with rabbis, it's the sitting down is synonymous with I'm beginning to teach. Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
it's good.
Yep. Pretty interesting there. And so here we have the first verse, and let's see if we can kind of get along here. The first verse, which says, "Oh, the gladness of the poor in spirit. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Poor in spirit. What's going on here, Juice? Poor in spirit, and for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What's going on here?
Poor in spirit. I think it's an idiom for humble, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah,
That's how
someone
I
who is
understand it.
humble. Yeah, Hasidut takes humbleness to a bigger. Uh, how to say? I think it's the most basic characteristic of a righteous person, a
Yes, to
humble
be humble.
person. Yeah, and many of the teachings that Yeshua says later refer to the humble people. Like you are blessed when people mock at you and they call you names and you don't answer because you are humble. That's the
You have a
point.
humble attitude. Yeah.
Yeah, So the humble heart, there are a few verses in the Psalms that talk about how blessed is a humble person. The God will hear the humble person more than any other. There's so many verses about that. Also, I think is Isaiah,
Okay.
uh, but I forgot where. Forgot the verse. But yeah.
Yeah.
I have here on this verse. I wanted to, it's I wanted to share how a like-minded to other rabbis of the time, um, found in the Gemara, the Talmud, etc. How a lot of other rabbis, they also were drinking from the same fountain that Jesus was, the apostles were. And so I have a commentary here on the New Testament, on Matthew and on the book of Luke, I want to say. And this is from Rabbi Tzvi Soloveitchik, and he quotes on this verse, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He says like this. He says, the sages of the Talmud, who were Pharisees, said, he who spends liberally in generosity should not give more than 5%, or else he may someday be in need. Once there was a man who wanted to give more than 5%, but his friend would not allow him. This is in Ketubot 58. Because he contrasts this, he says, poor in spirit. He said, honored reader, I have promised to explain to you the controversy between the Pharisees and the Essenes. Now I should begin to explain. The Pharisees would say that in every single attribute, man must take the moderate path and not lean to any extreme, so that he would not be overly evil or would not be overly righteous, quoting Ecclesiastes 7:16 through 17. So he says, for example, the Torah says, if there is is a needy man among you, you should not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy brother. Okay. And then they go into talking about charity. Okay. And what the Torah says and how the Pharisees read it. Okay. And I just read from the Talmud how the Pharisees read it. And then they go to contrast how the Essene sect, how they dealt with this. And it's it says like this: the Essenes would say that every single man needed to give everything he had to the poor and not leave anything for himself. And so Rabbi Soloveitchik says that in this sense, Yeshua is very much aligned with the Essenes in a sense, where he says, if you desire to be complete, he's talking to the rich man, he says, go and sell your possessions and give them to the poor. This is Matthew 19:21. Okay. The Essenes said that in order to enter into eternal life, man must practice every good attribute to the extreme. It is only concerning the most odious attribute, pride, that the Pharisees and the Essenes completely agreed. For the Pharisees said that it is incumbent upon man to distance himself from this evil attribute, and that man should be incredibly humble so as to not allow any pride to remain in his heart at all. Okay.
Wow.
So I wanted to make that clear there. And now we're going to move on to verses, the next couple verses, which is verse 4, which in Matthew, which read like this: blessed those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And then verse 7 says, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Maybe I wanted to key in here on verse 6, Chus, and Mitch, where it says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Let me ask you a question, because this is a controversy, as we know in Christianity. What is this about thirsting for righteousness? What is righteousness?
Righteousness. Interesting. So we are talking about people who were listening to Yeshua, right? And these people, all of them were Jews. So righteousness for a Jew means someone who obeys the Torah. Righteousness is not being nice. Some people think that a righteous person is someone who is nice. Yeah, righteousness is someone who obeys the Torah.
Yes, that's very important, because what we hear, what I grew up listening to and hearing in Christianity was that your righteous deeds were nothing. They were like they always quoted that quote in Isaiah, our righteous deeds are like filthy rags, and there was nothing we could do to be saved. And so they made works, deeds, like an antithesis to what Jesus taught and to grace, etc., etc., etc. This is the way they read it. Mitch, you have something on that verse, because I want to read what Rabbi Soloveitchik says here about it.
Yes, it also, when I see it, it goes, oh, the gladness of those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. I think satisfied is a great word too, because when I found out that righteousness is more geared toward the obeying and the understanding of Torah, and it's like what Zeus said, as far as somebody just being nice, but somebody who actually, you understand what righteousness, it leads up to that level of like a tzaddik. And to get to that level of being a tzaddik, that is the ultimate righteousness. And that's where Jesus set, and to understand him at that level, for Christians a lot of times is they have an image of Yeshua or Jesus as somebody who just was born, boom, and all of that knowledge was there, and all of that, righteousness was there, but that he went through his life attaining righteousness and knowledge, and he had to get it from somewhere, okay? And we've talked about this before, and where did he get that from? How did he move to those levels of righteousness to get to that point to be considered a tzaddik? And so that's always fascinating to me when we think about hunger and thirst. We're not thinking about hunger and thirst like, stuff, but we're thinking about hunger and thirst in the knowledge of the Torah and how that plays righteousness.
And even more so for the deeds, for good deeds.
Because it was always deeds against grace.
Right. And here you have Jesus teaching that a person should hunger and thirst for righteousness, for doing good deeds,
yes.
For being a person who is a doer of the word, not just a hearer.
Yes.
Here, Rabbi Soloveitchik, he talks about the actual word righteousness in Hebrew, right? What this word actually means. He says, for they will be satisfied. In the Talmud, in Bava Batra 10a, it reads like this. It says, come and see that the ways of God are not like the ways of flesh and blood. These are the ways of flesh and blood. A man brings a large gift to the king. Perhaps it is accepted. Perhaps it is not. Perhaps he will see the face of the king. Perhaps he will not. However, the Holy One, blessed be he, is not like this. If a man gives a coin to a poor man, this is the deeds of righteousness that Jesus is talking about, that one should hunger and thirst for. He says, if a man gives a coin to a poor person, he is worthy to receive the divine presence, as it says in Psalm 17:15. I, in righteousness, that same word, will see your face. When I awake, I will be satisfied with your likeness. That word righteousness in Hebrew is tzedek, which means justice, but it also directly related to the word tzedekah, which means righteousness, meaning connected to charity. Okay, pretty intimately connected with charity, right, Chus?
Yeah, to helping other people. Yeah,
exactly. And this is what Jesus was all about. These are the deeds that the Torah, the law of God, commands us into. He's driving it to the point, to the heart of the matter of what's going on, always making priorities and distinguishing certain things in the Torah itself.
And let me ask Zeus, Zeus, your personal thought of deeds versus grace, okay? Because that's a real thing in the Christian theology world, and in the in how they, if you understand, the whole, once I get my ticket, I'm good. Once I get that ticket, I'm good to go. But that's not how it is. And I just want, for a second, if you could take a moment to share your personal thought, because I do this all the time, and I just wanted to hear from you how you feel when you hear that deeds against grace.
Okay. So if we use the Christian understanding of the New Testament, we have Paul saying that we live by grace and the deeds are nothing. But then we have the brother of Yeshua, Jacob, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Who wrote an entire letter saying that the deeds are more important. So what's going on here?
Yes.
Exactly.
Do we have to disagree with one of them? The point is, in my opinion, that we all are saved by grace. The Jews, the Gentiles, everybody. Because God wants to save us, so he saves us. He saves us.
Yes.
Exactly.
But he saves the people who are into being saved.
I like that.
Yeah. So maybe you are not righteous, but you are trying so hard. Yeah, you are saved, dude. But if you think just because you pronounce a magic name, you are saved,
Yes.
and then you live doing whatever you want in your life, then sorry, dude, that's
Yeah.
not how it works. Yeah.
But that's
Exactly.
why I like the last video you made to us where you talked about um, we have to prepare for the messianic time.
Yeah.
It doesn't so much matter, and I don't mean to go too far out on this as to who the Messiah is, but we have to do our part in preparation with the people, the relationships that are around us. That's what's most important. And that requires deeds, right? And good works, and that requires works. I mean, we have to do that. Otherwise, if we don't prepare that soil, like you said, and I'll let you address that because a lot of people have not seen that video, but if you could
Okay.
address that.
Yeah. So in the Torah, one of the names for the Messiah, right? It's Tzemach. It
Yes.
means we usually translate it as the branch or the shoot, but the literal translation is a sentence that doesn't have a proper English translation. It's something that grows like a plant.
Yes.
We check the plants; they grow slowly, right? And we don't notice when they grow, but they do not grow if we don't give them the sun, right? The energy of the sun.
Right. Right.
And if the people below don't water the plant, so we have to water the plant. The plant is the name for Messiah, so we
Yeah.
have to water Messiah. What does it mean? In the New Testament, they say that the Messiah is the head and we are the body. So you imagine that the head says you have to love your neighbor, right?
And your body doesn't want to.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So do you think you are going to bring the Messiah here? I don't think so. You have to do your part. That's the point.
That's beautiful.
Exactly.
Yes.
That
Yes.
is beautiful. That is a great analogy. I remember when I first heard it, I was like, that's
Yeah, I had to
beautiful.
watch
That's
it like three
very
or four times, man, because it was compelling to it's very simple. I mean, what you
yeah.
say is simple, but to understand that concept is like, oh, that goes against a lot of the grain of what we hear sometimes, within the church. So
Christians deal with a lot of the spirit and in the spirit, etc. But the fruit of the spirit is deeds. I mean, you want to see somebody who
yes,
has good spirit of God is a person who has deeds. Because you could say whatever you want with your mouth, you can dress up however you want, you
yes,
can look very holy in your dress and all that. But if your deeds do not precede you, then no one will know anything. And Jesus actually taught just that. He said, he says, how does he say? He says, let your deeds be the one who glorify God, that people, when they see your good deeds, they glorify God in heaven,
yes.
right? So we're supposed to be these type of people, people whose deeds are someone who can say, oh man, who's your teacher, or where did you get that from, or whatever. And you're able to use that moment to bring Kiddush Hashem, which is sanctifying God's name, right?
And what that does,
Uh,
Fred, and what that does is that creates more of a hunger and more of a thirst for righteousness.
Exactly.
And that's how you
Exactly.
experience that righteousness, by doing. You don't experience it by reading. You only experience it by doing it, bro. You know?
Everything we read in the Bible, right? There's many Christians who truly love God and they devour the scriptures daily, right?
Yes.
But if we do not internalize what we're reading and it does something to our entire being in order that it could come out into our daily lives and action and stuff like that, we're really not doing anything.
Yes.
Like James, in his book, he says that. He says, hey, you show me your faith by, by whatever, but I'm going to show you my faith by my deeds.
Yes.
These two things are not against each other.
Yes.
True faith is evidenced in deeds. There's this one theologian that I remember when I heard this saying, it really made an impact on me, and I quote it all the time. He says, Christians are not only saved by grace, they are paralyzed by grace.
Yes.
Meaning,
yes.
they are no good for nothing. They're hanging on to this lifesaver Jesus or get out of jail card,
Yes.
and they, and it's not really like that, not on the ground at least, because when you actually look at Christians, they're the spearheaders in a lot of works of charity and a lot of good deeds, maybe without even knowing it, that these are all actual deeds that we're talking about here.
Yes.
That's
good.
But yeah, verse 8, this is another verse that I really wanted to tackle, which says, blessed are the pure of heart, or the gladness of the pure of heart, right? For they will see or behold God. Wait, hold a second. Wait on a second. What do you mean see God or behold God? What's behold is a better translation, but in a lot of my English translations we have here, this is a ESV. I'll tell you exactly what it says here. It says, for they will see God. Choose, can someone see God?
Impossible.
Impossible.
So what is Jesus talking about? This seeing, this perception. What is he talking about here?
Jim, Maimonides wrote a book, an entire book about this, that God has no form. Then everything in the Bible that refers to God as a person is a metaphor, right? So when they say they see God, it means they understand his essence.
Yes.
Yeah, I know what you are about. So I understand you now. I saw God.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's anthropomorphisms. So the language,
Yeah.
Human language ascribed to the divinity, to what we know as God, in order that man can understand. The rabbis call this the speaking in the language of men.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this scene. Go ahead.
There's a verse in the Torah that says that Moshe saw God, right?
Yes.
But then God himself say, you didn't see anything the day that I appeared.
Exactly.
And there are many verses later that people say, we saw God and lived. But then the New Testament says nobody has seen God. So what's going on?
Yes.
I was going to quote that. Jesus himself said that. He says, no one has ever seen God. This is the way he says it.
Yeah.
So is
exactly.
He? Yeah.
So it says here, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and I wrote a note on this yesterday. He talks about this scene. He says there are those who interpret the concept of seeing as, like Chus was saying, as comprehension.
Yes.
Or perception, like seeing with the mind's eye, not seeing with physical eyes, right? So he says, as in, and he quotes Ecclesiastes 1:16, which says, as in, my heart has seen much wisdom and knowledge. You don't really see wisdom and knowledge. It is abstract. You see what I'm saying? So then he says, for we cannot interpret this literally as it is written in Exodus 33:20, which Chus just quoted, which says, for man cannot see and live, when speaking to Moses. And even John, in the Gospel of John, says that Jesus quotes, no one has ever seen God. That's John 1:18, right?
Mhm.
However, he says, okay, no, I won't read that part because it goes off track a little bit there. The next verses, well, we cleared up something, I mean, that's pretty controversial. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions on that because, you know, the whole deal with the divinity of Jesus and Christianity and the Trinity. And so I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions on that.
Yeah.
The next verse says, "Oh, the gladness of those who pursue peace." Shalom. The blessed are those who pursue peace, for they will be called sons of God. Okay. And so very quickly here, Chus, I also want to talk about this. Those who pursue peace, okay, blessed are those who pursue peace, for they will be called sons of God. Wait a minute. I thought the only son of God, okay, was Jesus. What's going on here? There are other sons of God. You can become a son of God. What is the difference? What's going on here?
Sons of God. There are many different ways to interpret that word, Son of God. Let me see. So peacemakers. I think there's. Can you tell about Pinchas, right? He's called a peacemaker in the Torah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there are many righteous people who are called peacemakers,
Yes.
and one of them is Aaron as well,
Yes.
right? The high priest.
Yes.
Yes.
And the word children of God, there it can be used for angels, right?
Yes.
Or it can be used for righteous people.
Yes.
There are more uses, but these two are very common in the Bible. Yeah. So when the children of God had intercourse with the daughters of men, that verse refers to angels. It's the same as Job, right? When the children of God were in front of him, right? They had a meeting there, and Satan was with them. So that verse too refers to angels.
Yes.
But
Yes.
then God says to King David that he's his son. So is King David an angel? No.
Right.
And God says to Israel, "You are my firstborn son."
Yes.
Right. So
Exactly.
and Israel was not even the firstborn. The firstborn was Adam, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So why is he the firstborn? Because they started to obey Torah. So when they began to obey Torah, they became the firstborn son of God.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's really something that helps a lot because I always get said, but Jesus is the Son of God, and I'll say something like, okay, but that word has a lot of different understandings than just that one word. They take it on an ontological perspective, literal meaning that God actually has a literal son, like it was in Hellenism and in Greek context of mythology,
Yeah.
that the gods came down and had sex with humans and so procreated Hercules or something like that, and so they see him through this lens. They see Jesus through this lens. This is why they think that he's the Son of God. But in Psalms 2 it says, David is writing this, and God is speaking to him, and it says, "Today I have begotten you." I mean, David was already a grown man. God didn't begot him that moment. It's talking about something else, and
Mm-hmm.
and so it's important. It's important to understand that Son of God, like you said, can be a reference to angels, can be a reference to human beings in the general. It can be in reference on another level to righteous individuals. And
Mm-hmm.
also, Son of God was a title for the kings of Israel. And I say kings in plural. They were Mashiach, and Mashiach had that connotation, that term of being Son of God. Okay,
Yeah.
he was the king of
Exactly.
Israel. He was the Son of God, as we saw in Psalm 2, and also God speaks to Solomon saying, "You are my
Yeah.
son too."
This is because uh, God didn't actually want to give them a king. God wanted to rule over them forever, right?
Yes.
But then
Yes.
they saw the nations, and they kind of wanted a king too.
Yes.
Israel say, we want a king too. So the king has the duty to obey God. So the king of Israel has the duty to be God on earth, not literally, but is
Right.
his function, right? So that's why he's called the Son of God,
Wow.
not because God
Wow.
has a goddess wife or something. Yeah,
Right. Right. That's beautiful. I'm so glad you said that. Yeah. So like the Messiah was like the vice regent or the agent of God on earth.
Yes.
yeah, the second to the king, like Joseph.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 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 And it actually uses that in Genesis. It says that God says, no, the Pharaoh himself says that you would only be second to me. And Pharaoh was looked upon as like God on earth.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Stuff
so
that. Stuff
that's
that.
actually beautiful and very important that you touched on those points there, which help a lot of our listeners and help us all to better understand what's going on here. We're getting there. Let me read the last couple verses and maybe we could say a few things on those. It says, "Oh, blessed are those who are pursued on account of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And then it says, verse 11 says, "Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." All right.
Mm.
So what's going on there, Choose? What is he saying? What is he talking about here in verse 11? Or being, I think it's connected with verse 10, which is being persecuted for righteousness' sake.
Yeah. Some verses in some Bibles, some versions, instead of say for righteousness, they say for my sake or something like that. I don't remember
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, those are mistranslations. I think they were added into the text later by some scribes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, because it doesn't make any sense in the context. I mean, blessed, blessed are those who are persecuted for my sake. It's not even in the context. Yeshua is talking about righteousness,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Right.
So,
Yes.
yeah. So, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness. Makes more sense and is in most earlier manuscripts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
So,
what I have
yeah,
here. Yeah.
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 And
Because
then
someone can be persecuted because he stole a car, right? But
right.
yeah, can be persecuted for many reasons. But he's blessing here the people who are persecuted because they are trying to be righteous,
Yes.
which is very interesting.
Yes. That's a great point.
Yes.
That's it's crazy.
The blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Here, exactly, he's talking about the prophets because they were righteous and because they were looking for righteousness.
Yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
being persecuted because of me actually doesn't make any sense in the context. But actually, if you think about it, it can be used if you think, okay, Yeshua was righteous. So if we follow him, we are going to be righteous. So yeah, maybe that can work. Yeah.
Yes. 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 That's good.
Ray,
Verse. Go
look, Ray,
ahead,
let me
Mitch.
add this here, and this is out of the Torah Club, where it says Yeshua reminded his disciples that the prophets of old suffered similar persecution from their countrymen. He said, "Be glad in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way their fathers used to treat the prophets, like we see in Luke 20 or 6:23. In fact, Yeshua's disciples should be concerned if they do not experience some measure of persecution for the sake of the Master. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for their fathers used to treat the false prophets in the same way. The reward of the persecuted is laid up in heaven. That is to say, it remains with the Father to be paid out at the coming of the kingdom of heaven. The apocryphal book of Second Baruch contains a similar saying. It says, rejoice in the suffering which you are now suffer. Prepare your soul for that which is reserved for you, and prepare your soul for the reward which is laid up for you in heaven.
Yeah, the Talmud and Bava Kama 93a actually has it like this. For verse 10, it has, a man should be of the pursued and not of the pursuers. For there are none among the birds more pursued than the doves and pigeons. Yet scripture made them permissible for the altar, meaning that they were permissible to be sacrificed on the altar because they were of the pursued, not of the pursuers.
Yeah.
And then for being spoken of falsely for righteousness' sake, which, like we said, Jesus was a man who was righteous and pursued righteousness and taught the same, right? In the Talmud in Shabbat 118b, it also says, Rabbi Yose said, may my portion be of those who are suspected of some type of bad act, but are innocent. This is what he says. All right. So we're seeing here connections that are very much almost identical what's going on here in the Gospels.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Now we're gonna come to a verse that's maybe very, very difficult to understand, but let's see if we can get some understanding here. Verse 13 says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt becomes tasteless, with what could it be salted? See, it is no longer useful for anything except to be cast outside, and it becomes something for the sons of men to trample on. Chus, you have anything on this?
I think the salt is used in the Torah in the context of sacrifices.
Okay.
Right. With all your oblations, you have to offer salt. Is on Leviticus. It's one of the verses.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I think is the Zohar expounding on this verse. The Zohar of the first book of the Zohar says the salt was to be used because it softens bitterness. Right? Yeah, and so mankind cannot do without it.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's real beautiful. Rabbi Soloveitchik has here to also connect to the truth of what you're speaking about here, where we're talking about 70 different faces of truth. So he says, you're the salt of the earth. So this is very important. He says, up until now, he taught his disciples the good attributes that they should teach to the people and instill in their hearts. Now he begins to teach the disciples how to conduct themselves, for they should not imagine that if they conduct themselves in an unworthy manner, that they will inherit life in the world to come. Absolutely not, Rabbi Soloveitchik says. He says, thus, he told them this parable. Very seldom does someone eat without using salt to season the food, for the food becomes even more nutritious and delicious with the condiment, with the condition that it retains its saltiness. He says, it is the same for you. If you are not strict with yourself and are not cautious, even in the simplest matter, know that even for this, God will bring you into judgment, for he is greatly terrifying to all those around him and scrutinizes the righteous like a strand of hair, just as we find in the Talmud, where the rabbis say like this in Bava Kama 58. It once happened that the daughter of Nehonia, the digger of wells, fell into a large pit. They came and notified Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. During the first hour, he said to them, she is fine. During the second, he said to them, she is fine. During the third, he said to them, she has come out. They asked her, who lifted you out? She answered them, a ram like a goat, a ram happened upon me, and an old man leading it. meaning to say the ram of Isaac and Abraham. In other words, the merit of the forefathers. They asked Rabbi Hanina, "Are you a prophet?" He answered them, "No, I am not a prophet, nor am I a son of a prophet. But this is what I said. Shall that to which a righteous man has devoted himself," meaning Nachonia to his well digging, "become a stumbling block to his progeny?" Rabbi Acha said, "Even so, his son died of thirst, as it is said, terrifying to all those around him." Psalms 89:8. And he's showing, to what strict account God judges those righteous people. Just imagine that Moses was not able to enter the land because he hit the rock instead of speaking to it. It's like it's almost to it's likened to someone not inheriting the world to come because he hit that. I mean, at least this is how Christians would interpret it, right? But it's just talking about how strict he is with those who should know better. They have more responsibility, right? To do what's right. So I hope that helped to understand what's going on there on another level from you're the salt of the earth.
Yeah.
And that, we come to verses 14 and 15, our last verses. Says, "You are the light of the world. A city that sits on a mountain will not be hidden, nor do people kindle a lamp just to put it under a basket or a basket, but on the menorah to illuminate all who are in the house." All right, choose. Here we go. This is a good one. So what's going on here?
I think he's referring to Isaiah, where it says, "I'll call you with righteousness, and I will strengthen your hand, and I formed you, and I gave you to a people for light to nations." Right? I think he's quoting or alluding to this part of Isaiah, where he says that the people of Israel and the righteous people are light to the nations, to the world.
Wow, beautiful.
Nice.
That's really
Another question
something.
will be how to be a light, right?
Exactly. So exactly, how can someone be a light? Choose.
Kiddush Hashem, right? By showing good deeds, by obeying the Torah. I think it's Yeshua says somewhere, I think it's in that verse, right? That they shall see your good deeds.
Yes, the next verse says, "So also shine your light before the sons of men, so they may see your good deeds and praise your Father who is in heaven."
Exactly. So the light is the good deeds.
Yes.
That's what Yeshua is talking about.
Yes.
Beautiful. That's important, huh, Mitch? That we show there the importance for Jesus, how important deeds were. I mean, deeds were everything for him.
Yes. That's a great way. That's a great way to pull that together, man. That's really good.
Rabbi Soloveitchik, he has this. He says, "You're the light of the world." Verses 14 and 15 open our eyes to understand why Yeshua repeats the penalty twice in the statement, to be cast outside, and it becomes something for sons of men to trample on. He says, "For they have a greater responsibility, and their conduct must be an example to others, thus demonstrating the correct path to all creatures and illuminating it for them." All creatures, meaning what you alluded to, Chus, that the Jewish people are a light unto nations, to all people, right? And he says, and we find in the Talmud, in Shabbat 54b, it says, "Anyone who is able to forbid the people of his house from transgressing and does not is seized on account of them." If he can forbid the people of the town from transgressing and does not, he is seized on account of them. If he can forbid all the world from transgressing and does not, he is seized on account of the whole world. He says, awesome. Therefore, this is what Yeshua means. You're the light of the world, lighting up the whole world and teaching them the good and correct path. And it is incumbent upon you to forbid them from transgressing. And if, God forbid, they depart from the good path, you will be seized on their account, not just because of this, but for an even greater evil that you did. Through your evil deeds, you have caused them to down their evil paths. Thus, you will only be worthy to be thrown out and trampled by men.
Wow.
That's
Great.
big, huh? That's big there.
And I have a little simplistic way, Ray, for those that are still hard into the Christian viewpoint of this. Salt equals disciples. Okay? Saltiness equals obedience to Torah and Yeshua's teachings manifested in good deeds.
Beautiful.
Salt without saltiness is disciples without good deeds.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. That brings it all together.
Your lamp, again, is your disciples. The light is the obedience to Torah and Yeshua's teachings manifested in what? Good deeds. Concealed lamp is disciples without good deeds.
Yes.
And then finally, the meaning, a disciple who does not practice good deeds, Torah and the teachings of Yeshua, is not fulfilling his purpose and has become useless.
Wow, man. Hey, this kind of stuff, I mean, we've been studying this for some years now, but for a lot of our listeners, this is revolutionary. I mean, some folks have never heard these things. I mean, it can be considered among many to be blasphemous what's been going on here in this segment.
Yeah.
But I think that in our age and our time, there's actually really no excuse for no one to be able to just sit by, and let others tell you what's going on. Everyone should, really search and diligently scrutinize and research and see what's going on in the text. That we should not just be, just go along with the flow, but we should really try to figure this out. And in our day, so much technology, there's so much information at our fingertips that we could really get a pretty good education, and this will help us in our service to God and in spirituality and just to become better people.
Amen.
But this segment, man, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this segment, with you guys, Mitch, and we had our special guest, Chus, which we're probably gonna catch a whole lot of flack on. Maybe a lot of the people that know us, they're gonna be cheering us on, but they're probably gonna call the whole Vatican on top of us, man. This is gonna be crazy.
Dude,
and I'm gonna blame it all on you, Chus, because you're very close to them, being over there in Europe.
So,
I'm in Spain. I'm okay.
Zeus, if I get asked to leave this part of the world, I gotta have a place to come to. Okay, so if I get called a heretic, but seriously, to take an old guy who did his part in the Christian theology world, to take a American Cuban that can shoot a basketball a little bit every now and then. Take an amazing artist and a person of the world like Zeus, like that, man, to bring us three together and to bring us with a heart to desire to seek righteousness. May God bless us, and may God continue to let us be a salt to the world.
Amen. Oh, and to all of our listeners, guys, bombard us with questions, and we'll try our best. And if we don't have any answers, I'm gonna forward them all to Chus, who probably will have a whole bunch of answers.
We're going to give his email address, yes.
and what I'm gonna do, because it's a lot harder for you to say no to me, Chus. We're gonna ask you to come back again, so we can do this again with you at another time.
We'll see.
Smart guy. You seen that, Mitch?
Yeah, I saw that, man. I saw that. He left it open, man. But hey, thank you very much, Zeus, honestly, and may you rest in peace tonight, brother, when you sleep. Ray is always, man. This was awesome, man. This was awesome, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Chus, for being on here with us, man. And God bless you guys all. And till next time.
Yes. And for those of you out there, we continue to pray blessings on your families, and keep the questions coming. That's how we learn. That's how we wrestle with it. This is not a one-way conversation. We don't preach, we discuss. So take care, and we'll see you soon. Okay, man? see you.
Blessings, guys.